alternative school based in Appleton is expanding after its first year of operations.
It's called the FreedomProject Education, and it's moved to an $850,000 facility on Hickory Farm Lane. Today, the school held a grand opening for the new building, and Fox 11's Alex Rinaldo takes a look at the school and the school's philosophy.
The Freedom Project started offering online coursework last year for preschool through 12th grade, but now it has a new home in Appleton with classrooms and lecture halls.
Our dream is to have classes right here in the brick-and-mortar school that we have.
And those begin in September. That's when online courses start back up too. Executive Director Alan Scholl says web work will remain the core.
It's a true virtual classroom in that you see the teacher, hear the teacher, and interact with the teacher.
Online classes started last year with 28 students. Today, 200 are enrolled worldwide. The Freedom Project is funded by private donations and tuition, which starts at $1,600 a year. But because it is private, the school does not have to participate in state-mandated tests. So Scholl says the school might not be able to fully measure its success for some years.
When they take SAT scores or standardized tests, or they go out in the workplace.
The Freedom Project is very critical of the public school system.
I would say there is a value, and the value varies. It depends on the system, it depends on the teacher.
But the Freedom Project itself has gotten criticism. Scholl says many don't agree with the project's take on some subjects, including science. For example, creationism is taught as well as Darwinism. Teacher Jake Jacobs says public schools lack the ability to teach what he calls the United States Foundation in Judeo-Christian values.
That our founders gave this nation, that this is a republic under God, and so that's not a political leaning, it's a political philosophy.
It's an idea the Freedom Project is built on, but Scholl admits it's not an idea everyone agrees with.
Is this for everyone? It may not be, but it may be something they want to look at.
In Appleton, Alex Rinaldo, Fox 11 News.
I'm very pleased that our first speaker is Mr. Alan Scholl, because it's Alan's idea and perseverance that really, more than anybody else, I think, brought this entire project to bear. Alan was our leader when we didn't have an organization, and he's seen us through some hard times and brought us to where we are today with great success. So I'd like to introduce Mr. Alan Scholl.
Thank you, Duke. Looking around today and listening to the pastor speaking this morning, I can see many, many times in various junctures of our development that we have been blessed, and we have been blessed with great supporters. We're very thankful to them. We've been blessed with a wonderful team. I'd just like to take just a second and have all of the Freedom Project employees stand up, put a hand up, let us know where you are here. These are the people, these are the troops, this is the crew that put it together, and as far as this wonderful facility that we have here, where's Mike Menzel? Where are you? He's off building something or doing something or fixing something. Mike Menzel was the tireless warrior while I was here. I did most of my management by phone for the last 4 months as we went around the country and told people about the Freedom Project. So Mike, you run into him later today, congratulate him and thank him for the work that he did here. He had a huge hand in this, and I'd like to recognize him. Michael, I applaud you. Michael doesn't like the limelight. I have to drag him into it every once in a while, but we have a wonderful team. All of our team have worked diligently. We have interns here. We have artists and video people and management people, development people. It's been a great team, and they've done some tremendous work. Take a look at our videos and materials. Come visit our classes, and you'll see exactly what I mean. The pastor mentioned this morning about a drought, and I think it may be fitting that it rained this morning. We've had a drought here in Wisconsin, and this rain has refreshed the grass and the crops, and I know it's badly needed, and I hesitate to be disappointed that we've had rain in this state when we so badly need it to restore the water that we desperately need for a farming state. But there is a drought in education, and that is what Freedom Project is designed to end. We hope that our growth will go from the incremental to the exponential, that we will see many, many thousands of Americans and then tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands as we grow as a nonprofit organization, not for our own profit, but for the restoration of the understanding of our national heritage, our history, the form of government that we have, how it should operate, what our elected officials should be doing. And I'm so proud to have some prime examples of people who know what our government is supposed to be doing and not doing and are working. And I thank Senator Johnson and our Representative Mrs. Litchens for being here today to help us to celebrate. I walk around here very much in a sort of a dream state these days, because this is a dream and it's the culmination of a dream. It's taken a lot of work by a lot of people and a lot of funding from folks who have been generous donors that have helped us to get to this point. But if you walk around this facility today and you take a look at what we have here, and you realize that we have built what we have built to this point, and we own this building and everything in it and all the equipment that we're prepared to move to the next level in our educational effort with, and we are debt-free today. And that is an unusual thing for a startup. So I'm not going to go on. I could, and I'd love to, but I want you to enjoy the day and hear some other speakers here who I'm sure have some great things to say. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan. It's a pleasure, really, to introduce our next speaker. He is the CEO of the American Opinion Foundation, the group that is over all of us, and he has been heroic in his patience and his willingness, like a good manager, to let passionate people do what they do best. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mr. Art Thompson.
I've got to speak to you a little bit about that passion. I'm not quite sure what you're talking about, but at any rate, it ought to be a lot of fun. I'm just here to thank everybody, greet you, thank you for coming, and thanking the team, although Alan has already done so. But Alan is really the linchpin in all of this, and when I tasked him to do this, he at first was a little bit hesitant, but then he grabbed a hold of it and caught the vision, and what you see here is just the beginning of a much broader vision. It's a dream, but every dream takes cream, right? So I want to introduce a couple of guys that went out and milked a cow in order to get the cream to be able to build this facility. Marty Olson and Jim Fitzgerald were the two primary individuals, if you just raise your hand or do whatever you want, that raised the money for this facility. You know, a lot of times we forget that it takes money to do these things, and sometimes that's the most difficult task of it all. But it became relatively easy, actually, because a lot of people out there really understand that our education system in this country is in trouble. Serious trouble. I am increasingly making the comment, and I will hopefully prove it this next year, that I make the comment there is no school that I am acquainted with in this country that teaches history. None. Doesn't exist. What they teach is something that is called history, but in fact, when you get into the libraries, in the archives all across the country, and you start looking at what history really was, you find a whole different picture than what you see in the schools today. We're not ready to do that in this institution. That's too far afield from what people would believe at first. But the George Washingtons and the John Adams of this country need to be brought out into the fore a lot more than they have been, particularly in the last couple of decades. These were the giants. The rest of them tended to be a little bit flawed. And hopefully we'll be able to see, bring people to see the wisdom of these men, to understand the wisdom behind the farewell address of George Washington and things like that, to comprehend the the underpinnings of that thinking and the wisdom of why he gave us that as a marvelous guide to run government. Everybody touts it, few follow it. We have to inculcate within the body of students in this country the desire to follow those things as well. That this is the principle. I will stand on this principle no matter what. These men believed in education, but they also believed in action. So there's going to have to be somewhere down the road an action aspect to this education. Can you imagine if Washington and Adams says we're going to have an education program to separate ourselves from the mother country? Do you think that would have been successful? I doubt it seriously. Luckily, we have books today to do the battle instead of the bullets as they did. And the book, it means a lot more than that in the long run, in the hearts of people. And we mean to bring about a real revival of the independence and constitutional fervor in this country. And I want to thank most especially Alan for the work he's done. This is really something, as Dr. Duke Pesta has said, that he has really been the pinnacle of getting this thing done. And I want to publicly, again, thank you very much for the work you've done, Alan. Thanks a lot.
Well, both Alan and Art have mentioned how important it is to have good people in government. We have too few of them. And our next guest, our next speaker, has demonstrated time and time again her commitment both to making the country a better place and her support right from the beginning when this was two people working in a basement office. She was there with us. So it's my great pleasure to introduce State Representative Michelle Litchens.
This is not the same building that I toured a year ago as Alan. This is amazing what you guys have been able to accomplish here. And it is so necessary in our country right now that we start actually teaching our children that we have amazing founders of this country, and we need to be thankful for what they did, and we need to be reminded of the struggles that they went through to give us the precious freedoms we have here today, because if they didn't, we wouldn't have them. You know, the other interesting thing that I think you guys are doing here at this school is that you're teaching critical thinking. This is something that our children aren't being taught necessarily in our public schools today. And I have a good friend who's an aeronautical engineer, and he has to sub out a lot of his work across the country and the world, actually. And I had asked him if he works with a lot of engineers from India. You know, you would think that they're cheaper. And he had mentioned the fact that he said, you know what, they can do the book work, but they don't think. They can't create. That's something that we actually have taught generations and generations of Americans to think freely on their own, to be creative. And he said there are far more superior engineers that are American-born, that are from foreign-born, which is pretty impressive. But you know what? I'm nervous that we're losing that in our public school system today. We're not teaching that creativity and that critical thinking anymore. So I encourage everyone here to not only support this school, but also to get involved in encouraging our legislators to broaden this school choice in the state of Wisconsin. And that means you have to actually make some phone calls and get active, because we have a possibility next year, if we continue to have Republican control in the state of Wisconsin, to move forward to give our parents more choices when it comes to educating our kids in the state. And I think that is so necessary here. The average cost of educating a student in Wisconsin is $11,000. $11,000. And a lot of those kids are taught that our founders were demons. We're embarrassed about our history in our state, and many students graduate and they can't even read in the state of Wisconsin. We need to give parents the tools so they can make those choices, the correct choices for their children. So I encourage you to get active, to contact your elected officials to make sure that they get on the right side of that school choice issue when it comes around next year, but also to continue to support everything that Alan Scholl and everyone here has done when it comes to Freedom Project, because this is something our children desperately need. So I'm so thankful that I had an opportunity to get involved with this, and I will continue to support you in the future. So thank you all for all that you have done, and thank you for having me here today. Thanks.
The Congresswoman rightly points out that Beyond Washington, D.C., we have all sorts of important races here in Wisconsin as well. And the state of education in Wisconsin is perilous, too. Anytime you put Madison in charge, there's always going to be things to be concerned about, I think. But I can speak firsthand to the commitment of our next speaker to education. He is Mr. John Mocco, and he is a candidate for Wisconsin State Senate in the 30th District. Dave Hansen's currently holds that seat, one that we need to win back if we're going to be able to make some of the changes we need. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mr. Mocco, I think the next state senator from the 30th District.
Well, if you've watched the news, you've seen a divided Wisconsin, but that's not the Wisconsin I know, and it's certainly not the people that I've met. As I'm going around, the people of Wisconsin want ideas on how to move our state forward. They want ideas on creating jobs, on making government work smarter, and on improving education for both students and teachers. And I have high expectations of Wisconsin. I think it's the American ingenuity is rising up again. To me, there's folks that are coming to the table with ideas on job creation, coming up with access to working capital that we need to expand our businesses and create jobs, and in preparing education and our workforce. That's what the Freedom Project is doing. And that's what's happening all across the country. Nonprofit and for-profit education is filling the gap that our public schools have dropped. And it's not by accident. As we study, you were referring to some of the history. As you look at Alexander Hamilton's Report on Manufacturing and Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, it's that Adam Smith's invisible hand of capitalism that we're seeing in organizations like Kaplan, Phoenix, Full Sail, and right here at the Freedom Project. And I'm excited for it. And we need to. Georgetown University Center on Education and Workforce, in their 2010 study, concluded that by 2018, just 6 years from now, the U.S. workforce will fall short of needed post-secondary degree, associates or better degrees, by 3 million. And we will need at least 4.7 million new workers with post-secondary certificates. America is slowly coming out of the recession of 2012, only to find itself on a collision course with the future. The Council on Foreign Relations sponsored an independent task force to report on U.S. education and reform and national security. It was co-chaired by John Klein, the former head of New York Schools, and Condoleezza Rice, former United States Secretary of State. They concluded that the United States' failure to educate its students leaves them unprepared to compete and threatens the country's ability to thrive in a global economy and maintain our leadership role. While the United States invests more in K-12 public education than any other developed country, its students are ill-prepared to compete with their global peers. In the 2009 program for International Student Assessment, they found that 15-year-old students ranked 14th in reading, 17th in science, and 24th in math. More than 25% of students fail to graduate from high school in 4 years, and fully 22% of high school students do not meet college-ready. And only 22% of high school students meet college-ready standards in all of their core areas. It's not by coincidence that we're running into those problems here in the state of Wisconsin. Because of the heavy work that Representative Litchens and Governor Walker did in the last session, Wisconsin has moved from the bottom of the quartile in business development and job creation to 17th. That's quite an accomplishment. But the two areas that we're still lacking is access to capital and workforce development. We must do a better job of tying education to jobs and jobs to education. One of the benefits of Governor's Act 10 is that it actually empowered public school districts themselves. It pushed that control from a central location in Madison down to the individual school districts themselves. And what's good now in Pound and Coleman may be different than what's good in Marinette, which may be different than what's appropriate in my district up in Green Bay. And just like in 1980, when they said the economic reforms of that day were voodoo economics and they predicted great dire distress, the dire results that they predicted in Wisconsin schools have never materialized. Green Bay's general revenue will go up $5 million, up. Throughout my district, it's going up nearly 2%. We've seen a net gain of 189 teachers, not a loss. But those reforms must continue. In public education, we need to empower teachers to teach their classes the way they need to. And we certainly don't need Madison mandating classes on labor relations simply to appease a special interest group. As Representative Litchin said, we need to expand school choice voucher program in Green Bay and statewide. We want to be able to give people on fixed income the same opportunities for alternative education that my kids had. And I would like to include state-of-the-art alternative programs like the Freedom Project. And if our intention is truly to improve children and education, I'd like to see those vouchers with no strings attached. We also need to put dignity back into two-year degrees and certificate programs and recognize that traditional students are actually now beginning to be traditional students. And the fix doesn't cost more money, it actually costs less. In 2009, the average taxpayer cost per student per year at for-profits was a little less than $1,000. Nonprofits, $8,000, and public schools, on average, $15,500. And there's no shortage of private educators willing to step in and fill that gap. This is a good example. But they keep running into the headwinds of feather-bedding, special interest, and profound regulation. We need a little less Madison in Green Bay and a little more Green Bay in Madison. As a share of all, there's some myths associated with nonprofit and for-profit schools. And so as a share of all federal, state, and local funds, for-profits only take about 1%. Nonprofits only take about 15%. Public takes 84%. Freedom Project takes none. And what's the quality of that education? Graduate rates in post-secondary education for nonprofits are 63%, for-profits 63%, nonprofits 54%, and public only 38%. So I started out saying I have high expectations, and I do. It was American and Yankee ingenuity that fixed other countries, and we can fix this one. It was Deming that went and fixed Japan after the Second War. It was Milton Friedman from the University of Chicago that went and fixed Chile. They brought their poverty rates from 48% down to 20% in a very short period of time, and most of it was through capital expansion. And it's Full Sail University now that's establishing the largest university system in the country of Brazil, and they're headquartered out of Florida. And right here in Appleton, they're rising up all around, and they're saying enough is enough. Our choice is this Tuesday and again next November 6th. I know you've got voter fatigue. I know you're sick and tired of it, but we've got 1.5 more fights to go. And what the choice is clear. Do we want a situation, do we want a plan where government empowers the citizens or a plan where the citizens empower the government? The Freedom Project puts the power back into the people in giving parents, educators, students the quality education here in the Valley, throughout Wisconsin, and in all of the United States that we need. And I look forward to one day being able to hire a graduate of the Freedom Project.
Thank you, John. Well, everybody knows we have a crisis in this country, something that the Founding Fathers never envisioned. We have a career politician class, a class of elites. And they've demonstrated on both sides of the aisle an unwillingness, an inability to get things done, whether it's education or in particular our fiscal nightmare that we face. That's why I am so grateful that Senator Ron Johnson has joined us today as one of those few politicians who has built his own business, worked in his community, knows what it takes to run things, to govern, to manage. The only way we're going to make any of this better is if we get more people like this in power, who have ties to the communities, who have worked, know what it's like to meet a payroll, know what it's like to meet budgets. So we at Freedom Project are very grateful that he's here. We know he works hard for the state of Wisconsin. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Senator Ron Johnson.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Scholl, and certainly congratulations, Art and Alan. I'm happy to be here today to congratulate Freedom Project on the dedication of this, really fine new building here. I've gotten used to speaking kind of last in the lineup here, and so I'm never quite sure what I'm going to say, and because I don't like repeating what other folks have said, and I also like kind of playing off what other people have mentioned before me. And one of the things that Michelle mentioned was the entrepreneurial spirit of America and how it's going to require education to bring it back. And I'm not going to quibble with that point, but I've got a slightly different perspective. If you ever read anything by Arthur Brooks, one of his books, I think it was called The Battle, he made the point that Americans are just genetically predisposed to be risk takers. Take a look at who founded this nation. People that left their families, they left civilization, they came here, and they forged this new nation. My concern is not that we're able to re-educate Americans in risk-taking. My concern is we don't stomp that entrepreneurial spirit out of Americans. And how are we going to do that? How is it happening? Well, it's really the growth of government. As I travel around the state of Wisconsin, and quite honestly, as I travel around this nation, with charts and graphs, I'm an accountant, I use numbers, I use those tools to describe the financial situation. And I've got a pretty unique ability, I apologize for this, for taking a group of smiling faces and turning those things into frowns. I'm not going to do that here today. But I don't need charts and graphs to describe what the problem is facing our nation. It's that far too many Americans have either forgotten, and what's really sad, and that's really the purpose of this project, far too many Americans were never taught the foundational premise of this nation. And it's really that government, we need it. Our founders realized that. We had to figure out how to govern men without having government totally take over. And so our founders realized that government wasn't here to solve our problems, but by and large, government was something to fear. Because as government grew, our freedoms receded. And now what's happening in America, what has happened in America, is we've turned this marvelous nation of risk takers, of people that a nation built on personal responsibility and self-reliance, and we're developing a culture of entitlement dependence. And it's just simply not a nation that works. And so now far too many Americans look to the federal government to solve their problems. Now, I can't tell you how many people, what's your jobs program? My jobs program is let's reduce the role of the federal government in our lives. Let's I believe the greatest threat to freedom is ignorance, because people simply don't understand this. And again, that's what's so important about a project like this. It's what's so important about our communities. I can guarantee you the solution will not come from Washington. One of my charts, it's the opening chart I generally present, shows that 100 years ago, the federal government was 2% the size of our economy. In other words, 2 cents of every dollar flowed through the federal government. Today, that's 24%. 24 cents of every dollar flows through the federal government. Tack on state and local governments, we're up to about 40%. We're at the lower level of European-style socialism, and Art was talking. I think it was Art. You were talking about that we don't teach history. Well, we know economic history. Those models don't work. Look at the Soviet Union. Look at Venezuela. Look at the island paradise of Cuba. I don't understand why anybody would want to move ourselves in that direction. So, I could go on and on, but. Let me just basically conclude by letting you know that although the financial situation is pretty dire in this country, the solution does really rest in our communities. It rests with individuals. It rests in a rebirth of freedom. And as a United States Senator, I do witness things that most Americans don't witness. And by far the best thing about being a United States Senator is the contact I have with the finest among us, the members of our military. So I've been to Afghanistan, Walter Reed, Bethesda, Arlington. I won't go into all the stories, other than to say that the American spirit is alive. It is alive. And we breathe new life into it through education, through projects like this. And so I just want to congratulate you again on the dedication of this facility, and I wish you luck and Godspeed in your mission. So thank you.
We have one final speaker today who needs no real introduction for people who know Freedom Project or who have seen us grow. He's been a good friend, a good speaker. He's a teacher, he's an author, and he is a fantastic public orator. I'd like to present Dr. Jake Jacobs.
Mike made a point of telling me I only had 5 minutes. Thanks, Mike, because he knows I have a tendency to go on forever being the teacher that I am. So I decided I would talk a little bit about my father. I just live a mile down the road from here, on the north side of town. I bring that up because I was raised on the south side of Appleton, Wisconsin. And the Southerners were known for being a little wild back in the day. We were children of World War II veterans in my neighborhood in the south side of Appleton, near the Cinderella Ballroom, where the Big Bopper used to play back in the day. And I can remember as a kid, my father, when the planes, the warbirds would fly overhead, my father would look up at the planes and he would talk about the days when he was a teenager, 17, 18, 19 years old, fighting against the imperialist Japanese. And he used to tell me about the stories of friends of his that never came home again. And he would instill in me a love of this country, the way he would tell the stories about the glory of this republic. And his very dear friend, who unfortunately had a serious drinking problem from the trauma of being in Patton's Third Army as a tank buster. And he used to come over when I was a young kid and tell me stories about what it was like to be in Patton's Third Army, to destroy that vile philosophy known as National Socialism. And once again, my father would tell me stories of the greatness of the nation. And because of that, I decided to become an American history teacher. And when I went into the classroom, I have to be honest, I was quite taken aback because I didn't realize, I should have known better, how political correctness had taken over academia. I saw it at the universities I had gone to, but I didn't believe it was so bad in the classroom, the public schools in this nation. And so in the midst of all that, I decided, even though I would get in trouble with either my principal or the superintendent, I was not going to be intimidated by the political powers that be. I was going to stand up for the truth. The logo for Harvard and Yale, which were Christian universities founded back in the day where many of our founders went, is Lux et Veritas, light and truth. And to me, it's most important, the most important thing, that we're dedicated to the proposition that there is truth in the universe, absolute truth. And we've lost that in America. I mean, our wonderful Declaration of Independence says we hold these truths to be self-evident, that we're all created equal, that we're endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that Creator is called in the last paragraph of the Declaration of Independence the Supreme Judge of the world. And the educational institutions across this country, from K to 12 to colleges, are denying those profound truths. And organizations like Freedom Project are an attempt to recapture those truths, to proclaim those truths across the land. On the top of the Liberty Bell, they quote the Torah. The top of the Liberty Bell quotes the book of Leviticus, chapter 25, verse 10. It says there, proclaim liberty throughout the land and unto all the inhabitants thereof. That's the reason for the very essence of why Freedom Project even exists. It's to proclaim liberty, the truth of liberty as understood by our founders. And we're missing that in this nation. Now, in the travels, when I've taken my students over to Europe, and in fact, a dear friend of mine who he flew Hurricane planes against the Nazis in World War II, every time I go to visit him, he's about 89 years old, he says, "Jake, my country is dying. My country is dying." And I say, "So is mine. So is mine." And I would take my students to the beaches of Omaha in Normandy, France. And before we go, I'd show them the film Saving Private Ryan. And then I would take them over to the beaches. And I'd take them up top where there's 10,000 crosses and some stars of David, to instill in them the understanding that freedom, as we know, it comes at a cost, and it is not free. And for my students to catch that, to understand that. And then when we go to Italy, to take them to the bloody beaches of Anzio. Well, we won the war against the National Socialists. We won the war against the Soviet Socialists. But there is a pernicious socialism that has permeated our culture, our media institutions, our academic institutions, and it is an enemy from within. And Freedom Project Education exists to stand up against that enemy. And it's now more important than ever before. This is a battle and a war that we must all be joined together and dedicated to the proposition that we are free, and we shall not on our watch stand aside and be indifferent to the death of our country. We must fight to keep this republic under God alive. And I leave you with that. Thank you.